It never was the Sangreal at all. It's a modern invention. Well, actually, it's not a modern invention because that's actually given in the Arthurian legend. If you look at the Vulgate cycle, it actually has the same wordplay as they've used in the Da Vinci Code.
Mm-hmm.
But of course, this was written in the 14th century.
Right.
So it's quite obviously a very old piece of wordplay between Sangreal and Sangreal.
Right.
And it quite clearly spells out that the Sangreal was the royal blood. So this is a very old tradition. So the Holy Grail was the royal bloodline. And so the Grail in the first century was, in fact, Mary Magdalene. She was the Grail.
And, because King Arthur was, of course, searching for it. What does that mean?
Because for the bloodline.
Right, exactly. But also the idea that you mentioned previously that he was possibly castrated, meaning that he couldn't have any kids. He couldn't, he was looking for the bloodline because he wanted to continue it,
What was the other name for the Fisher King? He was called the Maimed King.
The Maimed King, okay, I never heard that actually.
He was called the Maimed King. Because the Fisher King had been injured in the genitals and could not have children.
Right, because the Arthurian legend says that it's because of Queen Guinevere, she was barren, she couldn't produce any kids. But what you're saying is that this was the other way around then.
Yeah, it was King Jesus that couldn't produce any kids because he'd been castrated.
Yeah.
And it's a logical thing to do. If you're going to send someone into exile, you're not going to want him to have thousands of kids left, right, and center.
Sure. Exile. Setting up franchises, yeah.
Yes, and just regenerate the revolution you've just had.
Yeah, exactly.
So that was a non-starter. So, and this is why we have this legend of the Fisher King being the Maimed King. This is what the Vulgate calls him. They call him the Maimed King. And specifically it says that he was maimed by a spear in the genitals. And that was his title. And it just all fits in.
How about some of the other characters surrounding this? I mean, Merlin, for instance, or Lancelot. Is there any relationship between the old stories of people from Judea and connecting with these characters?
Not that I could find within the names that are used for Lancelot and Guinevere, and these are all, I believe, Celtic references that I haven't managed to trace any direct reference to. The only one that is pretty obvious is Josephus of Arimathea. Joseph of Arimathea, who comes to England with the Grail Cup, and his son, of course, is Josephus, as we've just said.
Yeah.
And it tries to make clear that this is not the Josephus from Judea at all. So there is a direct correlation there, and we have the King Agrippa, of course, and various other minor characters. But I haven't managed to marry in the names that are given to Lancelot. I think this might need someone who's more conversant with Celtic language to have a look at the etymology of these names to see if there are any links.
Right.
And the brothers of Jesus and the various characters who we know from that era.
Right.
That would be another interesting story. But the similarities that I've teased out already are pretty convincing enough without those names matching.
And there's also, this is interesting because this also gives, or strengthens rather, the relationship, if one thinks about it, between Britain and Israel, or what today is known as the British Israel movement. There is a historic connection between these two lands, basically.
Well, yes, and we have that famous song, of course, by William Blake, who put the words to the song, and did those feet in ancient times, walk upon England's mountains green.
Right.
It's almost the national anthem of Britain.
Right.
It's sung at all football matches and rugby matches, and it's almost become the national anthem of certainly England, if not Great Britain. And of course, what it's trying to say is that Jesus' feet were upon England's mountains green. That is the central theme. Was Jerusalem built in England? What it says. And effectively, what I'm saying with this little story is I'm saying, yes, actually, Jerusalem, in terms of the Jerusalem temple, was built in Chester, Diwa. That was the temple. There are two temples within this fortress. One is the Piscean temple, and the other one is a large enclosure which encloses a small structure in the middle, which happens to have the same dimensions as the Temple of Jerusalem. So what I'm thinking here, and obviously the archaeology has not been completely done on this site, because again, they've built something else on top of this site.
Right.
That we have a copy of the Temple of Jerusalem sitting in Chester, in England. So Jerusalem was built in England, and the feet of Jesus did walk upon our mountains green. So, yeah, there is this big tradition that Joseph of Arimathea and Jesus were somehow connected with Britain, and that's been a very strong mythology down through the ages.
Right, and even, I guess, Cornwall, doesn't they have a prominent role in this?
Tintagel and so on. Every part of Britain has tried to claim this, for being their own, because there has been this legend, and everyone's been searching for, Camelot. Where is Camelot? So people have said that it's Camelodunum, which is Cheltenham. That was a Roman town of Britain. Some have said that it's Tintagel, stuck on the rocks, but that's not old enough. Some have said that it's Cadbury Hill, which is in the Midlands, and quite clearly that can't be it, because it was supposed to be built on the coast. Basically what I'm saying is, hey, I think here there's a good possibility that it's in fact Diwa. And this is the original Camelot.
Well, it's absolutely fascinating. And as you said, this is the Temple of Jerusalem here. This is no connection at all with some of the older temples there, the King Solomon's temple and things like this. There's no relationship between these two, or is it?
Well, they're supposed to be on the same design. So King Solomon is supposed to have built the first one, which has certain dimensions and appearance, which was all recorded in the Old Testament. So when they built the new temple, which was built by Herod, they had the dimensions and the description of it, so they could build an identical one. So what they did is they built an identical temple. I don't think they necessarily built it in the same location, because that's another book. But that comes back to my theory, which is actually borne out by the fact that King Solomon's capital city, Jerusalem, was actually in Egypt. And it was not moved to the Jerusalem that we know until the 6th century BC. So the original Temple of Jerusalem would have been in Tanis.
Tanis, right.
It happens that, of course, that Tanis has exactly the same name as Jerusalem. So within the Bible, Jerusalem is called Zion. That's why we have the Zionists today. Whereas Tanis was called Zoan.
Zoan.
It had the same name, Zion, Zoan. If you spell it in the Hebrew, it's exactly the same. So I think the first Temple of Jerusalem was actually in Zoan, not Zion. I think it was in Tanis, which is in the Nile Delta. And that's where King Solomon and his court were actually based. They, at the time, obviously owned all of Judea anyway, Judeo-Israel. So that was a part of their empire. So, that's why the traditions ended up in that place. But they weren't exiled to the Jerusalem that we know until the 6th century BC, under Nebuchadnezzar, the Babylonian king. But that is another story. But yes, the second temple, which was built by Herod the Great, would have been a copy of the first temple.
Right.
And so the temple that was built in the fortress at Diwa would have been a copy of that, obviously. And it just so happens that it has the same dimension. Now, we don't have a very good description of this courtyard and its temple, because they only did a very, very cursory archaeological dig across it, and so we don't have the full details of it. That particular site has not been touched for a long time, so it remains to be seen whether that's still actually there underneath some of the buildings.
Hey, just another thing here that is perhaps interesting connection. Maybe you can talk about it a little bit. In Indiana Jones, one of the movies there, the Nazis actually go digging for the Ark in Tanis.
That's right.
You know?
I don't know why they chose Tanis. I vaguely looked into to see why they chose Tanis as a location.
Right.
But yeah, they went looking for the Ark in Tanis, which is exactly where I say that the Ark was.
Yeah. So, I mean...
It's a bit of a coincidence. I don't know why they chose Tanis.
Well, I mean, is it really a coincidence? I mean, again...
I don't know.
Because
this was made before my book, I'm pretty sure. Yes.
Well, right. Right, but what I'm getting at is that you potentially could have picked up on the real story here, if you follow me.
No,
meaning that
it's quite possible.
Yeah.
You don't know who knows what sometimes, do you?
Of course.
So yes, it's the links I've put together, which say that Jerusalem was in Tanis, are pretty obvious.
Mm.
If you've got an open mind and you don't mind shifting Jerusalem by 100 miles or so, it's pretty obvious to anyone who looks at it.
Right.
If you've got an open and free mind and you're not wedded to the idea that that King Solomon and King David have to be specifically Jewish and not Judeo-Egyptian.
Yeah.
It's an obvious link to make. And I'm not the only one to have made this link, because our friend Josephus Flavius said exactly the same thing in the 1st century AD. So he obviously knew about it. He didn't make the full connections that I made, but he definitely said that the Israelites were the Hyksos pharaohs of Egypt.
Yeah.
And all I've done is follow on from that and make the obvious deduction. If the original Israelites were connected with Egypt, then why not Solomon and King David? And in fact, why not Adam and Eve as well?
Right.
So I've just made those obvious connections and joined all the dots together and come up with a picture which makes perfect sense.
Exactly. Now, just to return a little bit to the Arthur story here, is it possible that Arthur or Jesus then actually attained some kind of political power in England? That did he manage to influence people, or what happened there? Have you been able to figure something of that out?
I don't think he did. I think this was quite a secure exile. I don't think he was able to escape from this exile, and I think he probably expired here. What happened to his remains, of course, is open to debate. But I don't think he managed to get... there is no record of anyone becoming prominent in 1st century Roman Britain. So I think he probably expired within Diwa. And strangely enough, of course, just at the time that he died, and I'm taking his death here from... is it no, not Eusebius. Anyway, one of the 1st century the Bishop of Lyon, can't remember his name for the minute. Anyway, he said that Jesus died in the 2nd year of Trajan, which is AD 101.
Okay.
A lot later than the Bible says it.
Right.
AD 101 was his death. According to Irenaeus, that's right,
Irenaeus, okay.
But just after that happened, of course, this new temple within the fortress at Diwa was destroyed. It was actually dismantled. So just at the time when I think he would have died, this whole experiment, as it were, this whole reason for this temple expired with it, and it was destroyed, and it was destroyed for 100 years.
Right.
But funnily enough, it was rebuilt. It was rebuilt in the early 3rd century AD. It was rebuilt at a time when another Syrian king became Emperor of Rome. This is an era of Roman history that's not actually known very much. I didn't know